Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, December 4th, 2023. Time for another show. Not that I was ready for it. A little scrambled in the morning today. I think I was on an okay path to getting the show up and started and on the air, but got an email last minute that distracted me. Some family business, and I guess I can mark for everybody just because why not? It sounds like a pretty tremendous achievement. But unfortunately, the death of a family member who had reached the age of 104 years old. So a pretty incredible and full life. A little inspirational, if you ask me, to find out that somebody had lived quite that long and more or less healthy right up to the end and active. So we send condolences in the passing of Herb Terry, 104 years old. Really quite an amazing feat, but just something that landed on my desk at about 8:58. So made it a little bit difficult to press all the right buttons at all the right times. But, I guess once someone is 100, it's not that it's unexpected. It's just after they get to be 104, you're kind of like, how does this... I'll never hear this news, and I won't understand it when it happens. It's just sort of amazing thing. Anyway, certainly a full and happy life. So we have that going for us here. All right, we have other news, things that are, I don't know, more relevant to larger numbers of people. Although I guess if you live to 104, it's pretty relevant to a large number of people. But news happening regardless. We can still, of course, turn our attention to all of that. And Greg Dworkin is working on that now. I was just sort of thinking as I was putting together the post for the morning last night, thinking about it, and just reminder to everybody out there, you've enjoyed a couple of years of relatively quiet weekends where the normal news cycle prevails and there isn't a blabbermouth wackadoodle pretending to be president running around saying he's going to arrest people or execute this one or deport the other one or seize people's property or what have you. And you should be thankful for that. And in in a couple of weeks, of course, it'll be an election year and the news cycle turns upside down all by itself. And all the minutia of the primary season, if there even is one, becomes blown out of proportion. And then it's just a daily news cycle of whatever falls out of the candidates' mouths or their proxies. And, of course, when one of the candidates is Donald Trump, I guess that means it's the end of the normal news cycle. And we're back to the practice round of chaos where he's not yet president. And, of course, hanging in the balance is, are you going to be signing up for, well, I guess if you believe that they would stick to the strictures of the Constitution, another 4 years of the hectic, exhausting news cycle with no rest weekends. Do you remember how that felt? The chaos of it all? I know chaos is going to come up again when Greg joins us in just a couple of minutes. I've seen some of the stories he's been collecting, things he's been talking about on social media, so I know that the chaos agent is coming back. But you guys don't need convincing. Obviously, you're going to be out there and voting against Donald Trump, no matter who you're casting your ballot for. But I just kind of want to remind you of that. I don't know. I wonder if that catches on with other people. Did they feel the same thing? Maybe they weren't exhausted because they weren't political junkies, but just the idea, the chaos that can grow out of giving Trump a second chance at things. I mean, if you carry it all out to its logical conclusion, there's a couple of stories that we have to share about the kinds of pardons which we know about from when he issued them, the pardons that Trump issued. And I think the Washington Post had a follow-up just recently about the number of people, or at least the kind of people, and the number being more than one, of people who had been pardoned for no particular reason. That is, that, well, one, they hadn't gone through the regular pardon office vetting in the White House, which usually in a real White House is this a person, what's the benefit of extending the pardon here? Has the nature of the law changed? The societal view of what they did changed? Is there some remarkable rehabilitation? Is there some, but there needs to be a larger message carried by the pardon. And in many cases here, it was just not. It was just somebody who was an acquaintance of the president or an acquaintance of someone who was close to the president. And then, of course, some allegations that maybe some money changed hands as well in all of this. But this article was focusing on the people who had been pardoned who went right back to the same life of crime, figuring, well, I got away with it again, and it took years for them to catch me the first time. Now I'm pardoned, and probably in about a year, if I plow my ill-gotten gains into his election, Donald Trump will be there to pardon me again. So when you're thinking chaos, and you're thinking long-term chaos, think about what anything means, what any of the things you think are solid in your life. Do you own your house, your car, your business? Do you have anything at all to your name if somebody can murder you and take it and expect to be pardoned for it? Did I kill you while I was flying a MAGA flag? I did. Well, then I can get my attorney to go on Fox News and say I'm being persecuted by being imprisoned for your murder. Or maybe I'm sent on behalf of Donald Trump. Or maybe I just imagine I've been sent on behalf of Donald Trump. And, there's some legalistic answer here. Well, of course, your estate still has rights. Okay, so take it to courts and adjudicate your rights there and find out whether or not people threaten the judge overseeing your case and are pardoned for it later on because of what great patriots they are. That's the value, essentially, of the rule of law. When we speak about the importance of the rule of law and the necessity for a rules-based society, that's where it comes from. If there's somebody running the country who actually feels entitled to abusing all of those powers all at once, it can be a fairly serious mess, and you can find out very quickly that all of the things that you assumed were part of your life are in fact not part of your life. And when you have somebody who's got the personality type of Donald Trump to begin with, for instance, what if a magazine says he's not the richest man in the world? There are several remedies for this. One, of course, would be exiling, murdering, what have you, the reporter who says so. The other would be, of course, seizing someone else's property, saying it's his own, and now I'm the richest person in the world again. I don't know that Elon Musk owns Tesla and Twitter. Maybe I do. I don't know that Bill Gates owns Microsoft. Perhaps that's actually mine. So, and he's a crazy guy. I just want to kind of throw that out there. I know it's a lot to think about. I don't know how we jumped from one thing to the next in this show, but I don't know. I guess I value my weekends just that much. And I hope you and everybody else does too. If the small amount of chaos that he will bring for certain doesn't matter to you, maybe the large and extreme amounts of chaos that could follow, whether he gets elected or not, will motivate you. I don't know, or motivate your neighbor if that's what you need to get them to the polls. All right, Greg Dworkin is here. He's been watching the chaos. That's where he brought it up by speaking about it on social media. That doesn't obligate you to talk about it here, but I bet it's in your queue. Good morning. How are you?
I brought it up in 2017.
Yes, well, that's right, and you've been doing it ever since. And the chaos.
He's a chaos agent, and of course, proven right. Go ahead, prove me wrong.
Yeah, well,
and if you don't like it, tell it to the judge. Sue me.
Yeah, and then maybe
David, it's his show.
Kick the judge out of the country if it doesn't go well.
Right. You got to remember that when the World Trade Center came down, Trump had the biggest, tallest building.
Yes.
We know because he told us, because that's his idea of a good time.
Yes, I don't think it was even true either, but that didn't matter very much. But it was a fairly ridiculous direction to take things, given what had just happened.
Things aren't true all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes that lands him in court. And that's what we're going to start the show talking about. Some interesting things that perhaps we have covered, perhaps we haven't.
Perhaps we don't know. But remember,
Joyce Vance, in her Substack, Civil Discourse,
yes,
where she talks about things legal, notes that a surprising number of things happened today, which is Thursday, after I was on the show.
It isn't. It was. Yes. All right. So once you were done, they waited for you to leave, and then the thing started really happening.
Right. But this goes back to October. And one of the things that came up is that Trump filed a motion to dismiss Jack Smith's election interference case.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay. And
I
don't think that people, even though he lost this motion, and that was the news last week,
yeah,
I don't think people have really gone over why it was so important.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I'm sure there's some weird particulars.
Well, there are.
All right.
And it's a practical one.
All right.
Okay.
This is why. Are we talking about? Well, I'll let you tell me.
We're talking about the definition of interlocutory.
Oh.
and how to pronounce it, which I had to look up, of course, because it's not like I really understood it or had heard of it before.
But first, a little discussion about pronunciation. Oh, I'm sorry. That would be an interlocutory discussion.
Right.
If I did that.
See, the thing is, Trump is going to court because he's being prosecuted by Jack Smith.
Yes.
Trump claims you can't prosecute me because I was vaccinated and therefore I am immune.
Well, he has that.
Oh, wait,
for him.
It's not the vaccination. It's the fact that I was president.
Right.
And maybe I was president at the time, sort of maybe.
Yes, maybe.
And so as president, I can do anything I want because Nixon was right. If a president does it, it's not illegal.
Right.
And so I am claiming that you have to throw this out because I'm immune. And what Joyce Vance wrote in October is so relevant. Normally, a defendant doesn't get to appeal a ruling against them on a preliminary motion until after a conviction.
Yes.
Because if there's no conviction, there's no need to appeal.
Right.
But immunity issues are one species of issue that are different, and there's substantial case law supporting an interlocutory appeal here.
Yes.
The Supreme Court noted that the court had twice permitted defendants to take an interlocutory appeal where a claim of absolute immunity was denied. They also noted that in previous cases, the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit has treated orders denying absolute immunity as appealable on an interlocutory basis. So the point is that if Trump had won the ability to challenge this, it would have to be adjudicated before the trial, thereby kicking the trial to after the election. Jack Smith is trying to do a streamlined trial for January 6th, perhaps not the others, maybe not Fulton County,
right?
Certainly maybe not Aileen Cannon, who's going to try to kick it to 21-27.
Yes.
If she could.
Planet of the Apes trial.
Not New York civil cases, where they're going to defer to what's going on in court.
Okay. Still have the cold a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, because in all fairness to Trump, he can't be in court every day in all places all over the country, even though he deserves to be.
I am not certain that he can't be.
Well, so he would like to delay this trial.
Yeah.
And it was really important that Chutkan said, no, actually, you're not immune, because that shuts that down completely. And it allows Jack Smith to go ahead and stick to his schedule and try to get this tried by March. And that's why it's so important.
Well, it's definitely important that, everyone should know that the immunity claim is wrong. That is important. The timing, of course, very important. And this, as a method of delay, that it can be shut down, is important too. Interlocutory appeals, I guess if anybody hasn't figured out what it means, is the sort of appeal to which, and there's a narrow slice of appeals and issues that you can make interlocutory appeals on. And you don't always get it, but it has to be settled right in the middle of everything. You're in the middle of the run-up to trial. You're in the midst of the trial. This is the sort of question that has to be settled now and right now, or else we really can't logically go on with the trial. Gets an interlocutory appeal. You could probably figure that out from the root words. Interlocution. But what is this, a spelling bee? Come on, let's go. We don't need to know about that. But I guess so. Immunity would be one of those things where you can make the argument that, well, if I'm right, the rest of the trial, like going forward with this and having an appeal later, is a huge waste of time. We just shouldn't be having this trial. So, okay, we'll do it interlocutory.
In that sense, and in the sense of trying to adjudicate what Nixon originally said, one can argue that this wasn't a frivolous motion on the part of the Trump lawyers. On the one hand, the basis for claiming that Trump has immunity is something that does need to be adjudicated. And being well aware of the timing and the ability to throw the trial schedule off from the defense's point of view is a smart move. It failed.
Sure. I mean, you're going to have to try that.
But it's legitimate.
Yes.
It legitimately failed.
Yes, it did. I mean, it's legitimate in the sense that, all right, well, I mean, if there's any sort of immunity, you really do need to settle that.
No,
but there isn't one. Yeah, right. That's essentially it. Like, you have a very weird and warped idea of immunity, but I understand that you're able to point to the fact that presidents, like while they're sitting, have a certain immunity. The question you raise is the one that everybody sort of thought they knew the answer to already.
Right. I mean,
are you
it's
immune
a very
forever?
legitimate question to raise, and the answer is no. You're FOS, and you can't have what you're asking for. Yeah. Thank you very much. But, I don't condemn you for asking it.
Right.
So it was within your rights to do so, and no.
While you were once inoculated, you need a booster if you want to stay immune, and 2024 is when he's looking to get injected.
Now, another thing that has come up, which isn't interlocutory in the sense that it'll delay things, but nonetheless, it's a fascinating question.
Okay.
Cameras in the courtroom debate. Trump is now on the side of journalists.
They're my good friends.
It's an unlikely alliance, and they're trying to get Chutkin to let cameras in the court.
Yeah.
Trump wants it for propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
The media wants it for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
One of the reasons one could argue is to, get eyeballs to look at media who's covering it. But
yeah, absolutely,
as a side dish, it might be good for democracy. The problem is it's against the rules.
It is also being lobbied against by the charcoal and colored pencil industry.
Yeah. So both of those guys are really unhappy about it.
Right. They don't want that to happen.
The federal court system's reluctance to broadcast its proceedings, says The Messenger, stands in sharp contrast to the court systems in many states, including Georgia's, which is going to be televised.
Oh.
That's what makes it a fair trial, to have the airing, if you will, in the public square, that being digital media, social media, broadcast media, and charcoal and paper, as you say.
Right. Those guys are fun.
Crepas. It's going to be the Crepas trial.
Boy, I liked those when I was a kid. They're probably toxic. They said non-toxic. I think they're lying.
Yeah, well, which is how most of us got our news these days, said Gabe Roth, executive director of the judicial transparency nonprofit Fix the Court.
Oh, all right. I'll fix that. I'll be right back.
Key obstacle is a one-sentence rule of the U.S. federal court system's Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, which are, of course, capitalized.
Yes, FRCP.
Rule 53 states, except as otherwise provided by a statute or these rules, the court must not permit the taking of photographs in the courtroom during judicial proceedings or the broadcasting of judicial proceedings from the courtroom. That's pretty straightforward. The key thing there is except as otherwise provided. So what does that mean?
No.
What if you otherwise provide?
And then you have me. What if you take a picture of the otherwise provision? I don't know.
Right.
Existential question. Head blows up. Yeah. Well, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. I don't think Judge Chutkin's not going to want to do anything that could give anyone a platform for saying that this trial didn't go correctly.
Right. So it's not going to happen, even though it'd be a good idea. You've heard Judge Ludig argue for it, Lawrence Tribe argue for it, especially Neil Katyal argue for it. I don't think it's going to happen. But
yeah. Well, you can televise the prison
and I don't know this stuff.
I think that would be an adequate make good, right? We'll televise the sentencing, if there's any, and maybe a reality show about his time in prison.
Oh, Perp Walk.
Yeah. Get that instead. And, I know there needs to be public accountability, but the public accountability in something like this is get up and get press credentials and go sit in the courtroom.
Well, make them guilty. The thing is, you certainly don't want to jeopardize anything in terms of appeal. I totally get that.
Yeah.
So I want to read to you some things I wrote on January 22nd, 2017.
This year? Oh, 2017. Oh,
2017.
Okay. Got it.
So this was after January 6th.
That's the time machine, sorry.
The Wayback Machine.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back, Mr. Peabody.
I was not expecting that. All right.
I don't know if my reporter friends have wrapped their heads around the reality. Trump is a chaos agent. He threatens norms and doesn't care, I wrote then.
2017.
He exists to disrupt. The idea he's here for jobs and security is an illusion. There's no security with a disruptor, and there's no stability. Okay? If you don't see him as a chaos agent, you will waste time chasing down each outrage. That's not the story. His desire to disrupt is.
That's true. Yes. And this is, what was it? You said it was 2017. January, what's
22nd.
22nd. So this is 2 days after inauguration.
Yeah.
And we had already seen the chaos.
He threatens tradition. He threatens that which binds us together under rule of law. For all the angst about cultural clash, like rural-urban and economic anxiety, the idea of America deserves defending and preserving and not chaos. Yes. He's opposed to good things because,
that's broad.
It isn't partisanship alone. It's fighting to preserve the American ideal. And he's president now. He was then. And there's very little time for journalists and media who cover Trump to get their act together and do it right. And they didn't.
No, and they had a cut. Then they tried for a few years.
Right. Again, this is January 22nd. Start by understanding he's hired people like Kellyanne Conway and Sean Spicer to lie to your face and dare you to do anything.
They had done so, right? Largest inauguration crowd ever. Already done.
Yep. So that was then. Wow. So this week, The Atlantic publishes a entire issue which is devoted to the threat of a Trump second term.
Well, it's time.
And this goes with a bunch of other articles. New York Times, why second term presidency may be more radical than his first. Trump has long exhibited authoritarian impulses, but his policy operation is now more sophisticated, and the buffers to check him are weaker. So that was an important one. There was an important one from Robert Kagan about how bleak a Trump second term would be. Remember, Kagan is a neocon, so he can't fathom the idea of actually voting for Biden or giving Biden any credence.
And yet
he basically says Biden's a centrist and he's a Democrat, so he's going to lose. And so here's the problem with the next Trump presidency, yada, yada, yada. As if that's going to happen. We don't know that that's going to happen. We do know that he's probably right about what would happen if Trump won, but Trump hasn't won yet.
Right.
Now, David Frum is looking at it and saying an unimaginable threat. American democracy survived the first Trump presidency. That doesn't mean it would survive a second. But interestingly, Trump, it's not so much that he would become a dictator. What Frum writes is in his first term, Trump's corruption and brutality were mitigated by his ignorance and laziness. In a second, Trump would arrive with a much better understanding of the system's vulnerabilities, more willing enablers in tow, and a much more focused agenda of retaliation against his adversaries and impunity for himself. When people wonder what another Trump term might hold, their minds underestimate the chaos that would lie ahead. Well, I say we didn't underestimate it. We talked about it like 2 days after he was inaugurated, and we've been talking about it ever since.
That has been a catchphrase for you, the chaos agent.
So we got that one,
Yes,
I don't think we missed it.
That's true. I don't know. There was a couple of spots there that I thought were important. Like, it's not that he would be a dictator. Well, it's that he would be, but I don't know why we stopped short of that. And I'm not positive, by the way, that he'll be a dictator. He could just be a regular tater of some kind that we don't know about, but I would bet that we'll be in that territory. And the second bone of contention, as it were, was that he'll arrive with a better understanding of anything at all. He'll arrive with other people who may have a better understanding of things.
Yeah, I mean,
but there was no
Stephen
evidence
Miller
that he has a better
is
understanding.
Attorney General, for example.
Sure, I mean, he may have a better understanding than he did
or maybe
before.
just as chief of staff.
Yeah, or maybe just propaganda minister with a big hat. We don't know.
Frum had a good line here.
Yeah.
If he wins, and for those of you who care about regular order and proper procedure and precedent and stuff, if Trump wins the election, Trump will commit the first crime of his second term at noon on Inauguration Day.
True.
His oath to defend the Constitution of the United States will be perjury.
Yes, I agree. I think
line.
he committed that. He had committed that 2 days before you first wrote it. You were already late to that one.
Right.
Man.
From Trump himself and the people around him, we have a fair idea of a second Trump administration's immediate priorities: stop all federal and state cases against Trump, pardon and protect those who tried to overturn the 2020 election, send the Department of Justice into action against Trump adversaries and critics, and the independence of the civil service, fire federal officials who refuse to carry out Trump's commands, and if the lawless actions ignite protests, order the military to crush them.
Right. That reminds me of the Inauguration Day photo of the people taking photos of the burning garbage can a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. That was not a serious threat, whereas this absolutely is. I'm interested in all of this writing that's coming out. It's very eloquent and reaching I hope all the right people. And
I have to point out again, for the record, a lot of this stuff is coming from the Never Trumpers.
Yes.
Who people have made fun of and don't trust and this, that, and everything else. But they're doing the better job of cataloging and categorizing exactly what's going on here. I mean, that why his second-term presidency may be more radical than his first, and he's long exhibited authoritarian impulses. I mean, that's a Maggie Haberman article with Jonathan Swan and Charlie Savage.
Yes. It's
maybe calling the media vermin has sort of gotten their attention.
Oh, maybe. Or has it made them more vermin-like? Well, his supporters will think so, of course. But, yeah, I mean, it's the best trend in coverage in him in a while. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue on with the chaos of the engendered by the chaos agent. It's so chaotic we don't even know what we're going to cover next.
This is sort of a weird tie-in, but let me start with just a straightforward article, which will give us a platform to jump into something else.
All right.
This is Reuters this morning, December 4th. Fed, with rates at a peak, now looks at a hold and an eventual pivot lower. In other words, they stop raising rates. Rates may actually drop.
Okay. The good kind of hold.
That's good for people.
That's great because I'm a people.
Right. Now, this issue may seem distant. A closely watched gauge of underlying inflation remains at 3.5%, significantly above the Fed's 2% target. Yes. But this hawkish tilt in their words is also a way to keep options open at a time of uncertainty, even as the outlook has made Fed officials increasingly confident that the federal funds rate range of 5.25 to 5.5 in place since July is enough to take steam out of the economy and lower inflation the rest of the way. People have to step back and appreciate the big picture. They say it nicely, but basically what the Fed does is say inflation's too high, we better cause a recession.
Mm-hmm.
Prices will drop, demand will drop, and therefore lower prices. So you having a hard time as an individual is good for the country in general. Suck it up and, give us one for the team. Now, people don't like that, so they don't put it that way.
Oh. Well,
that's what's going on here. So
strategy.
If they stop raising rates, what they're saying is, all right, we're going to stop trying to put the economy into recession. Awesome. We think we have what we call a soft landing. We hurt the economy, but not enough to cause a recession, just enough to drop inflation. That's what we call a soft landing. A hard landing is, we caused a recession. Oh, well, we overshot. These things happen in economics.
They do. That's true.
And it's not our fault and we don't care.
Yeah, they love those metaphors. This is all sort of like airport metaphors. Soft landing, hard landing, foam the runways. That's like when it's really going to be super hard landing.
What about overshot the runway?
Yeah, they love. All right, well, I'm sure frequent air travel.
What about came to work drunk?
Oh,
fell asleep on the job.
That's I've not heard, but that might be.
There's a scandal.
That's not a metaphor. That's a real thing. Okay.
Anyway, so the Fed has that.
The drunk.
And Adam Bass saw this Matt Iglesias article. And the Matt Iglesias article was talking about Biden and his role in the world. And it turns out the American economy is doing better than the rest of the world. And Biden, as an incumbent, is doing better than most of the other incumbents in the world. Except for Orban and Modi, except for the
economy.
The authoritarians. He's doing better than Justin Trudeau. He's doing better than Macron, And so, for the most part, people are not giving Biden the credit that he needs. And what Matt Iglesias said is the punchline is that not only is the American economy in better shape than anywhere in the world, so are Biden's political prospects. He's down, but only a little, while Trudeau, Sunak, Rishi Sunak over in England, we've been talking about for a while, are all in line to get absolutely stomped. If Netanyahu had an election, he'd be stomped too. So it's not conservative versus liberal. It's incumbent versus like everything. And Adam Bass, who's a local reporter in Massachusetts that I follow, said, I read the Matt Iglesias piece and it's pretty good. One question I have for him, though, those plug into politics are starting to see a shift in the Biden administration's messaging, specifically giving people breathing room. Will media see that or not? So this is raising a media narrative question. In other words, once media locks in on a narrative, what does it take to change it? We saw that back with George Bush, the popular George Bush, who was being called the popular George Bush years after 9/11 when he wasn't popular anymore, because that was their narrative and they couldn't change it. So the narrative about Biden is that people are sour on the economy. There's a lot of interesting things written about that in terms of whether that's true, whether that's not true, because the economy is actually in pretty decent shape. And it isn't just a question of, you guys in the Howard Tower don't understand that. Business owners are expanding. They're hiring. They see their own prospects as pretty good. They're sour about the economy because they hate it when a Democrat is in office.
Oh. Yeah.
So my sentiment is bad because it's not a Republican, but in terms of my own individual circumstances, fine.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm hiring. In fact, I'm expanding. In fact, travel's up. In fact, all of these things that you look at, well, this, if the economy is so bad, how come travel is like at an all-time high? Isn't travel expensive? Well, yeah, but I mean, I got a raise. I can do it. I want to. People, for the most part, just completely underestimate how bad the pandemic was, especially under Trump, how bad the economy was.
That's true.
How much it took to start to begin to get things back on track, and how long it takes for that to happen. And so people are still really sour about what happened with the pandemic without blaming the pandemic, and for some reason they decided that they want to blame Biden.
Without blaming the pandemic. That is pretty incredible. I mean, I thought that maybe people gave the crashing economy a pass because it's, well, of course, there's going to be a crashing economy. There's a pandemic. It's the pandemic's fault. And
right.
We're not going
to... And now
to,
there's a Democratic president. Now it's your fault.
Yeah. Now that
you're supposed to fix
that's it. Well, the pandemic is gone.
He's an idiot. But
we
you're
voted the
supposed
pandemic
to fix
out.
It. I blame you.
Yeah. I mean, I guess so. But certainly, well, I mean, that mixed with the weird idea that also took hold that the pandemic is over, gone, and done with. It isn't, but everybody says or believes that it is, so it can't be at fault for the crappy economy anymore, even if the economy is not crappy.
That was bad in terms of public health, but it was also bad in terms of politics, as it turns out.
Well, all right. Yeah, that sounds bad.
Yeah, I mean, you should acknowledge the fact that the pandemic is still happening, and it's not only impinging upon things we want to do, but it's forcing us to do these other things that we may not want to do, like deal with inflation and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So Biden is pivoting to, we want to give you breathing room. We understand costs are too high, but if your expectation is now that the pandemic's over, prices are just going to revert to where they were in 2016, that's not how the world works.
No.
Ever.
No, it never has.
That would be deflation, and that would be really bad, and then we'd be like Argentina.
Oh, I guess at that level. I was
because
just thinking
then you'd
the
have
hyperinflation
level. To follow. I mean, there's just like a whole bunch of bad things that would happen. So, the idea that the pandemic is over and therefore things go back to the way you wanted them to be, but actually weren't a few years ago, it is vibe stuff, but it's not real. Yeah. And so Biden's messaging, has to be fairly clear about that. And it's just interesting that despite all of that, Iglesias says, Biden's actually doing fairly decently.
Okay. Well, I mean, he's up against
last
chaos.
4 national polls have him ahead, not trailing. Again, none of this is guaranteeing a win, but the idea that he's doomed to lose is just dumb.
Okay.
And so what does that mean? It means media has to start changing their message, just like they have to start changing their message with Trump. Okay, let's get serious. Trump is actually authoritarian. He's a chaos agent. He wants to be a dictator. This stuff would be really bad if it turns out he's elected. But also, let's get serious about Biden. Yeah, he's old. You may not like him, but he's actually working and doing stuff. And maybe he doesn't talk to us as much as we would like. But now that the election's getting closer and we're talking about contrasts, let's talk about contrasts. Let's talk about what's really going on with the economy. Let's talk about what's really going on with the Middle East and how difficult it is to, get things to settle down with reasons. And here are the reasons, but here's what we're doing about it, and so on and so forth. In other words, hard times in elections sometimes forces the media to do what they don't want to do and talk about policy. They hate talking about policy. They don't understand policy.
Right. That's why they love Trump so much. He'll talk to them about Britney Spears.
Trump just brought up, getting rid of Obamacare. Now we have to talk about policy again.
Hey.
But we have to, I guess, because, Trump is running and he's the leading guy.
But that's not
we
even
have to talk about it now.
Right. That's not even a policy issue. Oh, get rid of Obamacare. Well, that's just a talking point, but it enables them to say,
what
well,
has Obamacare
millions...
done? Why does he want to get rid of it? Why does he say he failed? Here's what's going on. Here's what actually happened.
They're not going to do that. They're just going to say, I don't know. It's
going to
cause a panic.
I'm saying the openings are there.
Yeah, well.
I don't know what they're going to do on the economy, but with the Fed saying that maybe we won't raise rates, the opening is there. I don't know what they're going to do with policy, like with healthcare. But with Trump saying he wants to get rid of Obamacare and DeSantis saying the same thing, the opening is there to talk about it.
I guess. Oh, well, that's hard. And it requires research and reference to things that happened before I graduated journalism school.
Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's hard, but they're managing to do it in terms of Trump and authoritarianism, so maybe they can manage the rest.
Yeah. Although the old guys are writing that.
Yeah. So here's the slow, boring piece, which is Iglesias. It's not just Biden. Incumbents everywhere are unpopular and losing elections. Now, if that's true, then maybe it's not Biden's age.
I guess that's true.
The Biden economic team likes to point out that inflation has been a global phenomenon, suggesting they don't deserve to be held responsible for it. But not only is inflation happening everywhere, voters everywhere are somewhat unfairly blaming incumbents for it.
Okay.
Right? In particular, I don't think anybody anywhere has pulled off what Biden wants to achieve, namely getting voters to stop being mad about inflation just because the rate of inflation has fallen. Discourse about this tends to ping pong, with one person saying, listen, dummy, nobody cares that the rate of price increases has slowed. What people want is for the price level to go back. And somebody else saying, listen, dummy, the only way to make the price level fall is massive recession.
Oh, let's not do that.
But what I, Matt Iglesias, think is actually going on is bitterness. If somebody stomps on your foot and it hurts, you're going to be mad that it happened, and even when your foot stops hurting.
Yeah.
So in Argentina, where the economy is genuinely in a state of meltdown, the electorate opted for a candidate promising radical economic policy change. Awesome. And that didn't happen in Italy, Australia, Sweden, or Poland. So I bring this all up to support the boring conclusion that when it comes to people's perceptions of the economy, both realities and vibes matter. Vibes are the tone of media and social media coverage.
Yes.
Pure vibologists. I wonder if there's such a thing as interlocutory vibologists. Pure vibologists cannot, I think, really explain why Biden's approval ratings are higher than his peers in Canada, France, the UK, Japan, and Germany. When you consider that Biden's facing some unique political headwinds related to age and his wastrel son, he actually appears to be receiving significantly higher marks on the fundamentals than many other leaders. You won't hear people say that, but it's true.
Maybe
the best explanation for that is exactly as the White House allies like to say, the American economy really is doing better than other major economies.
Have we tested the theory that every politician under 80 is doing poorly?
Yeah.
Because maybe it's that. These guys need
maybe it's that. Maybe the others aren't old enough.
Right.
Reality is a big deal, both because people experience real-world economic conditions and also because reality influences how the media covers things. That said, people don't have direct, unmediated access to all aspects of reality. The National Federation of Independent Businesses, I've referred to this, a lobby group for small business owners, does a monthly survey of small business owners' sense of the economy. The most recent index shows that business owners in the aggregate plan to make capital investment, hire new workers, have current job openings, and believe that right now is a good time to expand. And they expect the national economy to get worse.
Oh.
Why do they expect the economy to go? Because there's a Democratic president. You might win again.
Right. And I guess what's funny is that they say, well, I'm making maybe it says, I'm making all these investments. I'm hiring all these people. That means I'm going to make more money. And because there's a Democrat president, I'm going to get taxed more. Boo-hoo. Right. But then, if it's a net negative, then don't make those investments. That's economics. Well,
so he says the basic picture is we would like Americans to be able to buy more goods and services, and we want that in a world where we no longer have a huge pool of unemployed people who could be reemployed by providing those services. So we need policies that are geared toward increasing efficiency and productivity. That could mean taking on dem-aligned interest groups by reforming Davis-Bacon or Jones Act rules. I love when they throw that at, making you sound like Al Gore in a debate with W.
Boy, Jones Act. Okay.
It could mean taking on GOP-aligned interest groups like car dealerships, the most GOP group in the country. They're the ones who are expanding and then hate it because there's a Democrat in office.
Yeah.
Or it could mean ideologically ambiguous options like reducing land use regulations or free trade or making it easier to site renewable energy projects and transmission lines. But it does more or less mean deregulation, which means actually focusing on things that, unlike the junk fee crackdown, aren't on the laundry list of progressive agenda items that you expect a Democratic administration to pursue in a macroeconomic circumstance. So basically, what Biden needs to do is let people know he's working on lowering prices in a way that isn't going to hurt the economy. I'm aware that things cost too much. I know you don't like it. Here's what we're doing about it. In other words, that's the messaging.
Well, okay.
Well, you have your options. You have your openings here.
Oh.
And so, given the fact that the Fed may not be raising rates, trumpet it. Our policy, you don't have to call it Obamonomics. You don't have to call it Bidenomics. You don't have to call it, anything. But, you have to be clear that I understand what's going on and here's what we're going to do about it. And he's not in a bad position, given that the campaign really hasn't started yet. It's just starting now. They're starting to pivot away from Rose Garden stuff to let's get, down to where people are and tell them what's going on with their own lives. That's what's coming, and there's a lot of money behind it. So, I'm reasonably optimistic that Biden's going to be in better shape than he appears to be right now. On the one hand, with what's happening with Trump in court, and on the other hand, with what's happening with the economy.
All right. That seems like good news.
That's the reason to be optimistic. That doesn't guarantee a win, but that's the reason to be optimistic.
Okay. I don't feel it.
Yeah, well, it's
you
the
need to vibe
election.
better, right? Yeah, maybe that's it. Okay. It's a
the fact that, and one of the things that Robert Kagan wrote in his article about Trump, and Frum has mentioned, and many other people have mentioned, we've mentioned it in a derogatory way, they've mentioned it in a disappointing way. One of the reasons the vibe is so pessimistic is there's nothing Trump can do that's going to get Republicans to break with him.
That is the cause of a lot of pessimism, yes. Causes mine.
Well, this is the final thing. After this, you see these so-called moderates in Congress. Stop calling them moderates. Nancy Mace isn't a moderate, and the rest of them aren't, and they're going to vote for Trump. And you hear people say, this is awful, this is terrible, I can't believe this is happening. Nikki Haley and others will tell you, and a little more about Nikki Haley, but Nikki Haley and others will tell you how bad Trump is, was, and will be. Well, will you vote for him? Yeah, well, if he's a nominee. Mm-hmm. Peter Meyer, who voted to impeach him.
Yes.
Well, would you vote for him again? Well, sure, of course. What, you want me to vote for Biden? I mean, the idea that they can't see their way to voting for a Democrat, the way the never-Trumpers who used to be Republicans clearly saw the way, is what's so disappointing. It's disappointing not that they become Democrats. It's disappointing that they don't become never-Trumpers.
Yes.
That's as far as you could get them to go.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand why you can't do that. I don't really want you to be a Democrat, honestly.
Right, because then we'll complain that the Democrats are too blue dog. But
right.
I'd love to have that argument because that would mean that we have enough Democrats that we have that argument.
Huh. Okay.
That's why Big Ten stuff's good.
Yep.
So.
Yes.
That leads us to one of those people who refuses to be a never-Trumper, and that's Nikki Haley.
Why won't you do it, Nikki?
There were two
articles.
One of them, I think, was on CNN by Harry Enton, what Nikki Haley's path might look like, given the fact that Trump is leading everywhere. Yeah. And maybe a more interesting one by Nate Cohen in the New York Times entitled, Why Haley is Rising Among the Rivals to Trump. She's gained with educated and relatively moderate Republicans and independents, and that's a big liability in today's GOP. And he goes on to say, look, don't read this article if you think that you want some reassurance that Trump won't win. He's going to be the nominee.
Oh, right, okay.
That's not the point.
Here's what somebody is wasting their time with alongside him.
Here's an interesting thing in terms of what Haley represents. And what Haley represents is she's a factional candidate. There is a small faction in the GOP that doesn't like Trump, and she's the person. And probably, what DeSantis' problem is, what's he supposed to position himself as? If he's a mini Trump, why not go with the real thing?
Yeah.
He's never going to win. Haley at least can say, in contrast, I, not Chris Christie, represent the median Republican who doesn't want Trump. I'm at least as conservative, if not more conservative. I'm not an authoritarian and an idiot like DeSantis. I know how to smile.
Okay.
Among other things. I'm human. I don't need to be reprogrammed.
Right.
And I can run a campaign. Look, his is falling apart. It's absolutely collapsing because he set up a structure that was stupid because he's stupid. I'm better than that. All of you who don't want to vote for Trump should vote for me. And she'll get all that. She got the Koch network. She got, money. She's rising in the sense that people are saying, well, maybe she's the person that we should vote for instead of Trump. So that raises her from 8% to 10%.
Okay.
Now, does she have a path to win in Iowa? Probably more than DeSantis.
Okay.
If she wins Iowa, does that allow her to make a run at New Hampshire? Way more than DeSantis. If DeSantis ran and won Iowa, he's a terrible fit for New Hampshire. Haley could conceivably win Iowa and then New Hampshire. I don't think she will. But in other words, that's her path.
Well, I guess. What?
And which still
you have to
leads,
pick a path.
South Carolina and all the other
She
conservative
wins?
places to come that knock her off, and Trump winds up being the nominee anyway.
Okay.
But it's the kind of thing where you finish second in Iowa and claim you won, and then you hope that makes you win in New Hampshire,
Yes.
right? If Haley
Hope so.
finishes second in Ohio, she can say, "I won. Now I'm going to New Hampshire." If DeSantis finishes second to Iowa, to Trump, he's done.
Well, okay. Well, as long
If
as
Christie, finishes poorly in Iowa, he's done. Haley at least could say a second place allows me to consolidate everybody else. So maybe that raises her to 20 from 10.
I'm sure she would enjoy that.
Right.
It wouldn't do anything, but it would be.
And then Nate
Get some
Cohn
money.
goes to talk about the fact that when you're running against somebody who's like a strong nominee, like George W. Bush,
Yes.
or the first time he ran, or Trump now, the person who winds up being the one left standing isn't necessarily a strong candidate.
Right.
It's just that they represent a faction that still doesn't want to go along with the winner.
Okay. Yes.
And that's the point he's trying to make. And that's why Haley has some staying power here. And it's not that she represents strength in the Republican Party, because Kagan and all the others are right. They're going to stick with Trump. But for those who don't, she probably represents the best bet. And for those who don't want to go with Trump, they're not going to want to go with Trump right up until the election.
Yeah.
Then at the election, some of them will
Yes.
go with Trump.
Sure.
The hope is some of them stay home. And so if you have
Democrats
a
have
good
been
run
through
by
this.
somebody like Haley representing an alternative, that may wind up helping the Democrats when it comes to election time in the general election.
No. People who are still not ready to move over and.
Well, if you have Bernie, Hillary bad feelings, these things carry over.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose someone could probably make an argument that happens more among Democrats than among Republicans.
But again, in a
No.
close election, it doesn't
Maybe.
matter. You just need
Yeah.
a few people. We're not talking about
That's true.
huge
That's
majorities.
true.
We're not talking about large numbers. We're talking about enough.
Right. They don't even have to have a good reason.
They can stay
They
home.
just have to do what they do.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. But Democrats have certainly been through that. I wasn't even thinking about Bernie and Hillary. I was thinking about the issue of people hanging on until the very last moment, looking for any alternative, whoever is still left standing. Actually, it reminds me very much of the ancient times, 1992
Right.
election. People who threw themselves into. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to have been like a Tsongas supporter and then, last minute Jerry Brown supporter and anybody, but there was a big anybody but Clinton thing. And then all of a sudden now in hindsight, it's amazing that there even was such a thing.
Well, the thing about hindsight, again, that's why I found this Nate Cohn article so interesting. He's talking about factional candidates more than he's talking about Haley, just in general who they are and what they mean. Mm-hmm. These kinds of candidates are a common feature of contested primaries, as even the most formidable frontrunners struggle to appeal to every element of a diverse party. George W. Bush was one of the strongest primary candidates on record, but as a Southern evangelical conservative, he was always an imperfect fit for Northern moderates, leaving a natural opening for John McCain. If you look back, you can probably think of a factional candidate in almost every presidential primary cycle. Bernie Sanders, John Kasich, Rick Santorum, Mike Huckabee, Howard Dean, Pat Buchanan, Jesse Jackson. If you haven't noticed, all these factional candidates lost their races, but that's not a coincidence. It's very challenging to make a powerful appeal to a faction and somehow still become the favorite of the rest of the party. It's not impossible.
Yeah.
But it takes a special set of circumstances.
Yeah.
But if factional candidates usually lose under the right circumstances, they can have a big advantage in gaining a toehold in the race. They have a powerful appeal to a narrow but often quite sizable base of support. Mm-hmm. Broadly appealing candidates, on the other hand, struggle to become anybody's favorite, especially if there's a strong, broadly appealing frontrunner like a Mr. Trump or Mr. Bush. You can actually make that argument about DeSantis. The polls show that Republican voters in primaries like DeSantis. They just don't want to vote for him.
Yeah. Well,
because he's a generalist in the Republican Party. whereas Nikki Haley is the non-Trump faction candidate.
Mm-hmm.
So she may wind up looking stronger than DeSantis in the primary, and that doesn't necessarily mean that she wins.
Right.
I mean, there's
That's
other people that
true.
were on paper pretty strong. John Glenn, Tim Pawlenty.
Yeah.
And in practice, not so much.
Tim Pawlenty. Yeah. I was thinking before you said that, well, sometimes all they're really necessarily up to at that stage as well. I want it to be perceived as being my turn.
Yeah.
Next time.
I mean,
and Tim Pawlenty
the other way Nate Cohn puts it is if Trump drops out, let's say he's convicted or, he has one too many hamburgers and, has some health issues.
Okay.
And it's DeSantis versus Haley, who wins?
America. I don't know.
America wins, but who comes in second?
Maybe not. Yeah,
DeSantis.
that's a good question.
DeSantis beats Haley 2-1 in all the polls.
Okay.
Because the Republican electorate who votes in primaries likes DeSantis.
Well, then, of course, they would be able to say, right, while Trump was here, you ask yourself, why not go for the real thing? Oh, well, the real thing had a heart attack. Oh, all right, well, then I'll take DeSantis.
Yeah. I mean, Haley's still a factional
she
candidate.
Had her
it doesn't
moment.
make MAGA like her just
Right.
because Trump drops out.
Yeah. And totally changes the dynamic of the race, I'm sure. I also was thinking all along the time that there's kind of an unusual thing about, I don't know, like, for instance, when was the last time we are in an unusual circumstance in that Trump lost last time, but the last time that a Republican running for a second term of office had a contested primary. Seriously contested primary. Maybe this isn't seriously contested. I guess the numbers would indicate that it's not. But, yeah, and I don't know. Or maybe we've been thinking, oh, well, look at how unusual this is for him to have so much support that all the rest of the candidates combined, he still has twice the support. Well, in effect, he is still an
incumbent.
Yeah, an incumbent
Which
running for a
makes an
second
incumbent
term.
versus an incumbent election really different. And
That
so
is true
you really
also.
can't just look at it and say, well, I understand what's going to happen with Biden because I
right.
have so much experience doing this. This is all uncharted territory.
That's true. But it does make a certain amount of sense of the primary. Well, why is he running away with it? Is the country going mad? Are we turning authoritarian?
Well,
Maybe.
Biden's job is somehow or other he's going to have to convince people that Trump is this, that, or people know that. It's not a hard job at all.
Oh, that's a very different dynamic. The general election is a big question mark. But even the primary, well, he's trouncing everybody because ordinarily there's not even a primary when this is happening. It's just there's been an interregnum, like an interlocutory interregnum here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, we'll talk more Wednesday.
Very good. That seems like the day we should settle on. Thank you, Greg. Hope you're feeling better these days. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. That was, how'd you like that interlocutory break that we took there? All right. I like that it has introduced the concept of the interlocutory appeal into our vocabulary. Let's see. All right. Now a question of how exactly do we spend the rest of our hour? There's a lot to go over here. Let me just do one, I don't know what, that I just got to bring this one up. This is now old news, because it's about George Santos, and he's not in Congress anymore. He was expelled on Friday, as I guess you'd have to say we expected that he would be expelled, even though it's such a rare event that you gotta hedge the bets on it. But anyway, they expelled him. That's not too much of a surprise, especially if you look at what happened in the last couple minutes, I guess, of the drama, the controversy. Like, okay, well, what about the Republicans who are saying, oh, my God, we have to hang on to every single vote, then the margins are so narrow? And, okay, as Greg noted, they added another Republican vote after, was it a Utah special election? And so maybe you could say, all right, well, we can trade them one for one. If we've been limping along with X number of votes at the margin and we get a new one on, then we can afford to get rid of this embarrassment. But still, okay. So the question is, will Republicans provide enough votes? Because it's a 2/3 requirement. That's 290 votes in a full 435-member House. I don't think having one vacancy matters in those terms. It's still going to be certainly going to be about 290. And that's a long way to go. So there has to be a fairly significant number of Republicans in order to get to expulsion. So how do you get there? When people are saying, I don't know, maybe this sets bad precedent. He hasn't been convicted of anything. It seems fairly clear that he will be, but then, of course, time will run out. He'll serve his full term. There will have been no public punishment for him as a member. There'll be criminal punishment later, but shouldn't we really do something, et cetera, et cetera. And I think maybe this turned things at the end. I didn't get to watch the debate and the proceedings prior to, up to the vote on expulsion. So I missed this one. And I'll read it to you from the HuffPost. George Santos, among the many other things he's accused of stealing another House member's personal credit card information. And he calls him out on it, like on the floor. If you're like, what does it take to get these guys to hold somebody accountable? The answer finally comes in this form. It's not just that he's a political embarrassment, et cetera, that should drive it. But if there are other Republican members of the House who are able to say, that dude actually stole my credit card and then ripped me off, I think that's going to do it. Ordinarily, you stole money directly from me. Money is the most important thing to these Republican guys. So, to steal it one from another is pretty remarkable. And just like, wow, I don't know how to evaluate the charges. But of course, except to say at this point, I'll believe almost anything about George Santos, right? So here's the story. Republican Representative Max Miller of Ohio made the allegation not long before Santos was expelled from Congress. Liz Skalka reports for HuffPost. Max Miller accused his now former GOP colleague, George Santos, of stealing his and his mother's personal credit card information. How? I don't know. To make illegal contributions to his campaign, not to Max Miller's. That would have been fine. They would never have noticed that. But how do you like that? George Santos, well, he's the legal representative of this, blah, blah, blah. We have to let things play out. Well, how legal is it? I don't know. He's been campaigning on stolen money and, of course, faking everything. His resume, his name, his religion, whatever he can get away with, whatever he can't get away with. But how do you like that? That's the latest shocking allegation leveled against the indicted ex-New York House member who was expelled from Congress on Friday. Late yesterday on the floor, when was he saying this? On Friday? So he means on Thursday. Late yesterday, Thursday, on the floor, I alluded to a personal impact of Representative Santos's conduct. Miller wrote in a letter to colleagues on Friday morning. And I guess maybe House decorum rules forbade him from making the accusation directly during debate. But why didn't he follow rules? Is he a Republican or isn't he? Anyway, earlier this year, I learned that the Santos campaign had charged my personal credit card and the personal credit card of my mother. I don't even know how that gets into his hands, for contribution amounts that exceeded FEC limits, by the way. And he wasn't just taking $100. Holy mackerel. So, I mean, that was going to get flagged right off the bat just for exceeding FEC limits. And then they were going to be like, hey, this is weird. It's another congressman's and his mom. They're in trouble for exceeding FEC limits. What? I never made such a contribution. Oh, well then, holy mackerel. Credit card theft as well. Neither my mother nor I approved those charges, nor were we aware of them. We have spent tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees in the resulting follow-up. That's really going to burn him up. The letter also alleges that Miller had seen a list of 400 people whom Santos tried to scam through his campaign. I guess 400 other credit cards that he had stolen or attempted to steal. I wonder if there were other members of Congress. And so does Max Miller. I think he actually says that. Now, I believe some other members of this conference might have had the same experience, he added. So that'll turn votes against you. if you get an opportunity to steal the credit card information of the jury in your case, don't do it. Or, by the same token, I guess I should say in the George Santos worldview, you might as well do it, because what the hell, you're going to get expelled anyway. If you can get away with the cash, awesome. I guess that's just the Republican way. Miller's note to colleagues follows remarks he made on the House floor Thursday directed at Santos. "You, sir, are a crook," Miller said to him. Now, as it goes on to say that Miller didn't get into specifics at the time, and he shouldn't have. And quite honestly, I guess if Santos or anyone else, for that matter, had known, been in command of the rules at that point, you probably would have been able to have those words taken down. But I don't know that you would have won the vote. I mean, everybody was there to kick Santos out for being a crook. So they might just as well have said, yeah, that is against the rules. I mean, you're not even supposed to direct your remarks to other members. You're supposed to be addressing the chair at all times in debate so that this stuff doesn't happen. It does happen from time to time anyway. But then, of course, he very clearly makes it a personal accusation. But I mean, had George Santos stood to have the words taken down or asked for a point of personal privilege to address that accusation, people would have said, no interlocutory appeals while we're expelling you. So, I don't know. Also, I guess it's possible that I don't know what the rules are with respect. I mean, maybe, I don't know whether there was any kind of special rule governing the debate over, there must have been, because they delayed the vote. So, my guess is they must have had a special rule in place just to allow for the delay of the vote. Well, I suppose you could possibly engineer it on the floor if necessary. But I was asking because, for instance, when a member is censured, there's a provision in the rules that the member, if the measure passes, the member is prohibited from speaking for a certain period of time afterwards, or when the words are taken down, at least I'm positive of that. If your words are taken down, you can't speak for the rest of the day. And I'm not certain how much leeway Santos would have had to respond to allegations, even if he was directly accused on the floor, while he was while they were debating his expulsion. But anyway, I didn't watch the debate. Those of you who did probably know very well how much leeway Santos had to defend himself, if any. But at any rate, that probably should have been taken down, but I guess they let it slip on that one. Miller didn't get into specifics at the time, probably hoping not to be taken down, but alluded to being one of Santos's alleged targets. "I myself have been a victim of George Santos," we all have really, "as well as other members of Congress in terms of defrauding through public donations, receiving an ethics complaint from the FEC, which I had to spend tens of thousands to defend myself," he said, right? So they caught the illegal donation beyond the maximum. The FEC actually starts coming after Max Miller, I guess as they should initially, right? This is a violation. And then he had to go out and hire a lawyer and say, well, one, I didn't actually make that donation. I mean, I understand your concern if I had made the donation, but I didn't. But then, of course, they said, well, if your defense is that the credit card was stolen, you're going to have to make some offer of proof here. And that's a costly thing. And to have to be there making the case that another Republican member of Congress actually did this credit card theft, this identity theft, is, well, it'll get you expelled. Or it should, you would think, right? Although, didn't we have this information before? Wasn't it the case that didn't Santos's, oh no, I guess it was a different kind of fraud, identity theft. Didn't one of Santos's campaign people impersonate a Kevin McCarthy staffer and call either members of Congress or important donors and say, you should be donating to Santos because McCarthy, I'm from McCarthy's office and McCarthy endorses him specifically. And, okay, so he's been involved in a lot of different frauds on members of Congress and their close associates. So this is not the first time. All right. Well, at any rate, Santos's office did not immediately respond to a request for comment about Miller's allegations. Miller's office said the congressman has no further response on the matter and directed HuffPost to the comments he made in January calling on Santos to resign. I don't know whether there's any specifics in there, though. Probably just a bunch of vagaries. But there is a link to it. Santos faced a vote on Friday to boot him out of the House a year into his brief, troubled term, during which it was revealed that Santos made up most of the resume that he used to pitch voters on his candidacy. He's been indicted on charges related to bilking campaign donors and using campaign funds for personal expenses. Santos has not admitted to any wrongdoing and called the charges against him, you'll never guess what, a witch hunt. Where did he get that idea? I guess that's now in the campaign box that you get from the Republican Party. But, it is interesting, right? If you ever wonder, how could you possibly get away with it in such a high-profile position? It's the answer to the question of how long can you last drawing a federal salary as a member of Congress by lying about everything from top to bottom and stealing every dime that comes across your path? And the answer is 1 full year. Pretty much. Well, I guess we haven't reached 1 full year, right? But basically 1 year. And if that's enough time for you, then you can consider whether you want to follow the same career path. He resisted calls to resign or face expulsion despite the mounting evidence against him, but Congress reached an inflection point after a damning House ethics report last month accused Santos of spending campaign money on designer accessories and Botox. And you know what? I'm not certain that they would be able to throw out everybody who did that. They just were already mad at him for a number of other things. But I can absolutely see certain campaigns getting away with saying, yeah, that's the reality of being in front of the cameras all the time. I needed designer accessories and Botox. Federal records show that Miller contributed thousands of dollars to Santos's campaigns in transactions from February and September 2022, apparently in excess of the legal limit and without having returned the overcharge. Miller's mother, Barbara Miller of Ohio, also contributed generously, overly so, I guess, to Santos's campaign last year, but was refunded some of what she gave to the campaign, per FEC records. An FEC spokesman told HuffPost it could not confirm or deny the existence of a complaint against Miller until the matter has been resolved. But couldn't we have an interlocutory ruling on that? Miller, one of only 2 Jewish Republicans in Congress, does that become important? Was one of the first members of his party to call on Santos to resign in the wake of the discovery of his serial fabrications, which include lying about being Jewish and being related to Holocaust survivors. It is not okay to fabricate or lie for political gain. Wow, that's a broad statement, says Miller in January. I don't think he really means that. This is especially true when the lie seeks benefit from the murder of millions of Jewish people. Sure, that would be extra bad. I do not believe George Santos can effectively serve and should resign. Okay, that's it. That was kind of astonishing. So I thought I would throw that in there. Would you like to know something else astonishing? I'll tell you what Greg thinks you should know that is astonishing. I mean, he's right that you should know it and that it's astonishing. Where were we with this one? All right, let's see. Oh, yeah, okay. Rick Wilson in his Substack is a good source to turn to when it comes to sticking it to weirdo people who are Republicans, because he's a Republican, and so it's cool to see him stick the shiv in here. And we've got to be careful about what we say and the phrasing we use about everything, sticking this and that. This is the story that we told you last week of the Zigglers in, that's like the new euphemism for people who do what they do, down in Florida. Oops, I may have hit the wrong button here, to get the paywall out of the way. But, Florida's GOP sex scandal gets ugly. I didn't realize it was going to get ugly. Now it's ugly. Threesomes, hypocrisy, sexual violence, that's the ugly part, and Moms for Liberty. Goodness. What's this? So some elements of this book are adapted from his upcoming Florida book. How do you like that? Rick Wilson is a bit of he's a figure. We'll say that. And he's willing to do these things. He illustrates his piece from some graphic that he found on Twitter. Now, I'm not certain of the significance of this, but maybe the rest of you will pick up on it in a way that I don't. But the central graphical feature is just a big red background, white type, very bold, stark, sans serif type. The big graphical figure here is GOP, and the O in this is an upside down pineapple. I'm not certain if I understand the significance of that, if there is any, but I love the phrase here. Remember, we're talking about a married couple, sort of. I mean, they were married. The couple part is this part that's sort of, but moralistic Christian American family values types for sure. And they are involved in a long-term three-way sexual relationship. And of course, for people who insist that there are only two genders, what does that mean mathematically? It means that you have to say something like this in this big graphic that's included here with the upside-down pineapple, which says, it's not gay if it's a three-way. Holy mackerel. But of course, well, certainly for people who think they're strictly two genders and that's that, well, it's Adam and Eve, I guess, going on here. But, for people who think there's two genders and two genders only, somebody's gay here, or at least bisexual. That's the terminology I guess we would prefer to use for this. But they don't get to choose anything because, as you know, everything's rigid. And only us woke weirdos are going to say something like, well, I understand why that. Okay. Well. Anyway, Florida, it says, is the Mos Eisley of American states. He owes me for that one. I have always told you that Trump Tower was the Mos Eisley of Earth, but I get you. If you are looking for a wretched hive of scum and villainy, just take I-75 south from Atlanta. I should know. I was one of them for many, many years, is what he's saying here. I'm a fifth-generation Florida man. The only way I'd be more Florida is if you saw helicopter news footage of me buck naked, except for a pair of Crocs, running down the center of a highway median, carrying my pet alligator over one shoulder as I fled the explosion that wrecked the meth lab where I lived with my common-law fifth wife, who is both a first cousin, a Santeria priestess, and my parole officer. So, in other words, it's a long way to go to become more Florida, and certainly more Florida Republican. Still, this week's explosive news out of Florida is one of those perfect apostasies of Republican moral hypocrisy. I think I've tripped on that word before. Christian Ziegler, not Dirk Diggler, but Christian Ziegler, the chairman of the Republican Party of Florida, the whole damn thing. He was handpicked for the job by Ryan Tyson, we are told, a powerful DeSantis insider and lead pollster to Ron's campaign. And his wife, Bridget Ziegler, the founder of the infamous Blue Stocking group, that's interesting, Moms for Liberty, were involved in a long-running threesome with another woman. The Zieglers are Florida GOP royalty, close friends and allies of King Ron and Queen Casey DeSantis, whom he identifies as R. Amnesia, present at every possible event in the GOP GOP firmament. The headlines are devastating. And here they are, and they're linked. Florida GOP chair accused of sexual battery. Florida GOP chairman ensnared in inquiry involving alleged sexual battery. Quote, the hypocrisy is just off the charts. Ziegler's face reckoning after moral crusading. Police investigating Florida Republican Party chair over alleged sexual assault. And the last of the included headlines, Florida Republicans face a crisis as the state party chair is accused of sexual battery. That's pretty matter of fact. If the head of the Florida Democratic Party were accused of rape and sexual battery, and none of those headlines mentioned rape, by the way, stemming from a long-running polyamorous relationship, Republicans would be screaming it from the rooftops. Fox would go live to 24/7 coverage, and Twitter would melt down. They would associate every Democrat who failed to condemn it and assert that they were guilty of the same crime. So far, Ziegler has refused to step down, even though Ron and Casey DeSantis moved, just as they did with Matt Gaetz, to cauterize and control the damage by calling on Ziegler to step down as RPOF chairman. Interestingly, DeSantis appointed Bridget Ziegler to his Vichy Disney Reedy Creek board earlier this year. Remember that? And has yet to ask for her to be removed. That's interesting. You remember that whole story about he tried to come up with appoint a new Reedy Creek improvement district to push Disney out of the control of their section of Orlando. Just this is how close the Zieglers are to DeSantis. This is the sort of thing she lands on. There's really no reason in the world for her to be there, but patronage job given away to these people because they're that close to I would say close enough to the DeSantises that it would be legitimate grounds of questioning to ask, do you know this third woman? Did they ever tell you that you'd think they'd hold it close, but you are close. So what did you know? Bridget's Moms for Liberty could get a meeting with any Republican member of the Florida House, I would guess, or Senate. It says House of Senate, but I doubt that's what he means. House or Senate at the drop of a hat. They were feted in this town. Feted? How do we say this? In this town, like they were the second coming. Pun intended. Their battle cry was parents' rights, but their reality was a thinly veiled rollback of gay rights and the broad imposition of a Christian conservative curriculum in Florida's public schools. Bridget Ziegler was the poster girl for Moms for Liberty. Pretty, poised, and poisonous, she was a blonde tornado of action and activity. She helped elect dozens of like-minded MFL types and MFers of various stripes to school boards, none of whom cared about education, of course. Instead, they were passionately committed to injecting their flavor of social conservatism into the curriculum and the libraries. As Zach Anderson of the Sarasota Herald-Tribune reported, the Republican power couple have emerged as leading advocates, and they're not a couple, in Florida for a new wave of conservative moral crusading largely centered around LGBTQ issues, especially in schools. Think of every anti-LGBT trope, and they peddled it with gusto. I, Rick says, was never a social conservative, not even in the 1980s when it was a trendy political move to at least claim you were saved, born again, accepting Jesus as your personal savior, and eager to leap feet first into the culture wars. It was never my thing, for more reasons than I can articulate. The God Squad were never my people. I was much more last generation of cold warriors than moral majority. I cared about individual liberty, a robust foreign policy, and free markets. Stuart Stevens and I, a similar figure, share a joke from the late 1980s and early 1990s in Washington based entirely on a core truth. It was a typical sort of Republican game to wonder quietly, is X gay? Not the social media, but that's a good question too. Is X the person, any person? It's the variable here. Is X gay? The funny answer was usually, no, X isn't conservative enough. It wasn't until having two gay sisters, yes, I won the lesbian lottery, that left me underwhelmed with the SoCon social conservatives. It was the fact that on any given weekend, the same a-holes who were preaching about the immorality of the, quote, homosexers, apparently that's an evangy, as he says, evangy, term that never stops making me laugh, even now. Among the same a-holes who were preaching about this every weekend were at the D.C. Eagle in leather on Friday night, looking for rough trade. Holy moly. It's always the Republicans, he says, who displayed the most outrageous, exaggerated, social conservative play acting, outrage on gay rights, gay marriage, divorce. Yes, it was still a stigma with some SoCons, even into the early 1990s. Adultery and out-of-wedlock pregnancy, Always them who ended up having dirty little secrets of their own. It was always projection, or as I say, every Republican accusation is a confession. But Florida has a particular relationship with power, sex, and social conservatism. Because, as I've always told you, Trump world, and Florida is Trump world, is a sex cult. But he doesn't get into that here. Florida has a peculiar relationship here with sex, power, and social conservatism. Florida's senior mega community, the Villages, is notoriously home to more swingers and STDs per capita than anywhere in the known universe. Now, I don't know if we can go to the universe on that one, but I'll let the accusation stand. We have the highest density of strip clubs and quote-unquote massage parlors. Really, of course, thinly disguised sex trafficking brothels in the country. And remember that too touched Mar-a-Lago and everybody who went to Mar-a-Lago. Wasn't it, what's his name? The owner of the Patriots got himself wrapped up in that too. And that the weirdo lady that was hanging around Mar-a-Lago making connections on behalf of the Chinese government. Oh my God, China, communist China, was running the, I mean, it's thoroughly infused in Florida culture. He's absolutely right. There's more funny stuff about it after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, lots of other things to catch up on, but I guess we'll finish on this thing because it's very entertaining. Rick Wilson knows what he's doing when it comes to entertaining us about how disgusting people can be in Florida. So where were we? Oh, yes, right. The highest density of strip clubs and massage parlors, which are really thinly disguised sex trafficking brothels. One of the first pieces, he says, that I wrote as a warning to my Republican friends at the 2012 GOP convention to avoid the perils of Tampa's famously video camera rich strip clubs on Dale Mabry Highway. By the way, you might also have instructed them a couple of years later to avoid the camera-rich strip club environment at Pervalago as well. The 2001, I'm sorry, I guess the 2001 is one of those strip clubs. And what do you know? I don't have any effing idea whatsoever, but it's available, or it's obvious from the rest of the sentence here. The 2001, the Dollhouse, I don't know why, two E's, and others were given the Romana Clef treatment as what? Kitty, you know what? I don't even know where he's coming from. Kitty McTitty's Boom Boom Room. I don't even know what the hell's going on in this sentence. This is a state where Matt Gaetz somehow, some strange reason, escaped charges in a case where he and his running buddy, Joel Greenberg, Venmo'd teenage hookers that they allegedly shared. Ew. That's actually in there. Ew, in parentheses. Gaetz and Greenberg are pictured below with some other guy. Oh, by the way, it's Ron DeSantis, not wearing his lifts in this picture. Of course, if you lived in Tallahassee in the last decade, you knew about the game, and that was the Matt Gaetz thing, in which, I don't know, I forget exactly what it was, but they were basically all trading information on the House floor, the legislative floor, about trading pictures of staffers and lobbyists that they had sex with. Okay. They'll tell you here. What's the game? I thought we were also supposed to know already. The game, Matt and a cohort of young Republican legislators were in a running competition to F their way through Tallahassee's lobbying corps, staff, and fellow legislators. I'll let Business Insider's summary suffice, because he knew we were going to read this on the radio. Business Insider, I guess, did it this way. Matt Gaetz's Florida sex game included a Harry Potter challenge and extra points for sleeping in sorority houses, a female Republican tells Insider. How fun. Why Harry Potter? Extra points. I guess that's the House Cup Challenge kind of reference, maybe. Tallahassee is a town where people with vast sums of money and the best quality drugs in the world swim in a sea of hypocritical social conservatism. Things like the DeSantis Don't Say Gay bill and the endless attacks on Disney have marked the last 3 legislative sessions with a roaring hostility to LGBT Floridians. It's excellent odds some of the same people eager to call every drag queen a pedophile on the floor of the Florida House left the governor's club to have their asses professionally beaten by a dominatrix or to sleep with an escort. Probably true too, but that's always kind of been their MO. Hide in plain sight, right? You know, the best disguise for being accused of being a pervert is be a moralizing, hypocritic preacher of Christian family values in the public sphere, because it's going to make a lot of people say, that can't possibly be true. That's so incredibly hypocritical. Like, how does that guy get up and function every morning? But that's actually the cover that they like to cloak themselves in. Anyway, back to Rick here. I'm a profound believer in personal liberty, writ large and small. I do not give a rat's ass who you sleep with, what you do in your bedroom, or what makes you aroused, as long as it's not kids, pets, or non-consensual. Don't break the law or scare the livestock, as he says. My problem with the Zieglers is threefold, and that's appropriate. You got to have a fold for each of them. First, if the police reports are to be believed, it is alleged to have escalated into violence and rape. Even the suspicion of that is way outside the lines. Sadly, as much as the broader story reflects on all their shallow personal and political hypocrisy, I think it also speaks to the broader culture of the abuse of power in my state. When you can easily abuse political power and personal power, the abuse of physical power becomes almost inevitable. And I know this is not directly related to it, but if you were paying attention this morning to my social media ravings over one thing or another, I will just call out, as I was saying this morning, with respect to Trump, but I mean, this can be replicated on the state level as well, and asking the ultimate question where this all goes eventually, taking it to its logical conclusion. Do you own your home, your car, your business if the president pardons the person who murders you and steals it, right? I know that's a outlandish and hyperbolic version of this, but again, the same theme comes up here on the state level in a piece that has nothing whatsoever supposedly to do with Trump, except that Perva-Lago is in Florida, and that's not coincidental. But, right, as it says here, it speaks to the broader culture of the abuse of power in my state. When you can easily abuse political power and personal power, the abuse of physical power becomes almost inevitable. How could it not, right? Why don't I just use my physical power to grab this thing? I don't do it now because it's against the law, and I am not positive I can get away with it. But if I'm positive I can get away with it, I'm going to be pardoned for it, I'm going to be rewarded for it, then I'm going to do it. It's almost inevitable. Second, these two were both eagerly and passionately, and three really, eagerly and passionately interested in using the power. Oh, we don't know if the third person was interested in being socially conservative politically. That's true. So these two out of the three were both eagerly and passionately interested in using the power of the state to control, marginalize, or criminalize how other consenting adults express their sexuality, even in exactly the same way, by the way, either in words or in bed. Hell, I'm not gay, and I was offended by it. Finally, it's their effing smug, crappy, we'll say, hypocrisy. Both of them were egregious trolls, smugly playing the nuclear Christian missionary position, family values image, and stoking a fake moral panic over, quote, predatory gays. I was looking for the right words about Bridget Ziegler today when a fantastic opinion piece by Fabiola Santiago asked the perfect question. All right, let's have it. If a Moms for Liberty co-founder had sex with a woman, why is she targeting Florida's gays? Good question. Because it's not gay when I do it. I wish, and it's ultimately just a Gimitarian problem, I guess. I wish to God this story was just about Republican social conservative hypocrisy. I wish it were about a jackass and his wife getting busted in a basic bitch sex scandal. Sadly, it also appears to be about violence and rape. Both Zieglers must resign their posts. And then a final note. And by the way, for an update on the story, for those who wanted, some specifics about exactly what are we talking about with Christian Ziegler here? What did he do? He apparently arranged, spoke to their third partner there and arranged for a, whatever you would call it, but arranged to get together and have sex. And she said, yeah, sure, consensual. But then Christian shows up at this woman's house alone. No Bridget. And this woman says, to tell you the truth, whether it's today or forever and always, I don't know. But she says, look, I was actually he says, she can't make it today. Well, I was really in it for her, quite honestly. That was my interest in this three-way relationship, my primary interest. We tolerate having you around, whatever. You're part of the package. Okay, fine, whatever. But just you? No. At which point he's like, well, I actually would like the sex anyway. Pow. And overpowers and rapes her. So a basic breach of even that already illicit contract as between the three of them. And then, just a basic abuse of everything that goes into it. Even if you don't care about how they spend their time personally. But this you cannot do. Anyway, a final note is included here. But now you know what the story is. And then the woman calls the police and the whole bit, rape kit taken and everything. So, she's going full tilt on this. She says this is what it was, and that's all there is to it. Final note here. As I was completing this article, it says, news broke that a 911 tape from a friend of the woman who alleges Ziegler raped her was released. Oh, I don't know. It's not easy listening, as the friend relates the charges and outlines the woman's deteriorating mental health in the wake of the alleged events. The Florida Center for Government Accountability, which has led the charge on this story, released the 911 call tape in its properly redacted form. And there's a link here if you wish to listen for yourself. The link reads, listen, 911 tape released in criminal investigation of Florida GOP chairman Christian Ziegler. Quote, she told me she was raped yesterday and she's scared to leave her house, unquote. And that's usually the case for any rape victim anywhere, no matter who the alleged rapist is. But imagine if it's among the most powerful political actors in your state at a time when the governor of your state is running for president on an authoritarian platform. Imagine, in fact, that your assailant is one of the most powerful political figures in the state and is married to one of the other most powerful political figures in the state. And they are both extraordinarily close to this ambitious fascist running for president. I can't have this in the middle of every movie. You don't have to imagine an unspeakably evil, beyond every expectation and every historical example kind of political figure to figure this out, right? Every movie figure Democrat or Republican, probably, in the movies anyway, would say, look, I can't have this during my presidential campaign. We're going to have to do anything we can to cover this up. So you're in familiar territory. So yeah, she's afraid to leave her house. Remember, one, where you have all that political and what else did he say? Political control and how did he put it? Because it leads to the physical ability to, or, making the physical abuse inevitable. Not just physical abuse like in a sexual relationship, but I mean on a broad scale, like in the state or the country writ large. We're going to use physical power against enemies. Here it is. When you can easily abuse political power and personal power, the abuse of physical power becomes almost inevitable. On the micro level, like here, and on the macro level in the state writ large. Not only can he go over and use his physical power and to rape this woman, but he's also he's more likely to do that, given that he knows that he can use political and personal power to make sure, one, that those charges are buried. He did a bad job at that one. I guess too much outrage. And two, that he can make this woman feel so threatened, not just by the fact that he has used physical power against her, but that if you go outside here, if you report this, we'll destroy you because no one's going to believe you because we're such prominent political figures. But I guess at this point, maybe the miscalculation is nobody's going to disbelieve that Christian blabbermouths in Florida are in fact disgusting perverts and power abusers. That's actually the preferred narrative here. So I don't know. Maybe they miscalculated. And of course, for Ron DeSantis, I can't have this in the middle of my campaign. Yeah, you don't want to have it in the middle of your campaign, but you're not actually in a position where you're going to be able to convince everybody to distance you from it and to accept that distancing or to cover it up or to pull any shenanigans to bury the whole story. You're not actually that popular. You don't actually have that kind of power. So anyway, an interesting story for a lot of reasons. So consider it, and consider it for the broadest possible reasons too, that, are you going to now elect one of these types of Republicans? I mean, and at this point, Trump is a smarmy, sex-addled Florida man himself. We don't yet have any reason to believe that Ron DeSantis, well, I guess nothing provable certainly that Ron DeSantis is mixed up in anything of the sort, but it would be par for the course apparently for powerful Florida-based Republican politicians. So it's amazing that it hasn't come out yet. On the other hand, he's such a weirdo robot, maybe nobody is having sex with him. I don't know. Anyway, that probably will look ridiculous in hindsight at some point in the near future as we find out that this is actually the case. All right, let's see. Other things to share with you. This one feels like a Tuesday story. A couple other, I guess we might as well just continue to scare the crap out of you maybe. Or we could, maybe we'll do this because this is, they're all so timely. Given the passing of Sandra Day O'Connor recently, there's a battle of, how to frame her legacy, etc. So I'll offer you a couple of takes on that one and a couple of the things that I discovered over the weekend, which were of interest. First, in Slate, Dahlia Lithwick and Mark Joseph Stern would be good people to turn to on the question of Sandra Day O'Connor's judicial legacy. They frame it this way under the title of The Sad Ending of Sandra Day O'Connor's Judicial Legacy. And here's how they put it. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor died on Friday at the age of 93 due to complications from dementia and a respiratory illness. The first woman appointed to the Supreme Court, O'Connor had an immense impact on the law over her 24 years on the nation's highest bench. Her pragmatic jurisprudence often kept the court aligned with public opinion, especially on controversial issues like abortion, affirmative action, and the line separating church and state. Today, her legacy is in shambles. Maybe her fault, maybe not, I don't know, but it is in shambles. She watched as her replacement, Justice Samuel Alito, methodically dismantled her imprint on one area of the law after another. And the conservative justices who succeeded O'Connor have flatly rejected her practical, compromise-oriented approach, almost always replacing it with rigid doctrines of dogmatic formalism that consistently led to far-right extremes and unworkable ideas. O'Connor grew up on a cattle ranch in Arizona, a far cry from the ultra-privileged upbringing of more recent Republican-appointed justices. She attended Stanford University at age 16, then went on to Stanford Law School, where she excelled despite widespread sexism. When she couldn't land a legal job, despite graduating near the top of her law school class, she hung out a shingle and worked on small cases. I mean, it's quite remarkable, really. O'Connor took time off to care for her sons, while always keeping a foot in local law and politics. Her rise to power began in 1969, when Arizona Governor Jack Williams appointed her to a Senate vacancy. A Republican, O'Connor established herself as a moderate dealmaker and rose through the ranks to Senate Majority Leader, becoming the first woman to hold that position in any state. She was appointed to the Superior Court in 1974 and elevated to the State Court of Appeals in 1979. This, by the way, also still a very, very unusual path to the Supreme Court and the federal bench in general, quite honestly, which is what made her kind of a unique and important figure, besides the fact that she was the first woman on the court. She wasn't the first, state judge, but it bucked a trend even at that time to put her in there. And certainly she was one of the few members of the court to serve in the legislature and have an intimate understanding of how that other branch actually operates, that lent a real credibility to her decisions on matters of federal law, legislative history, etc. Anyway, so she was appointed to the Superior Court in 1974, elevated to the State Court of Appeals in 79. Although this was an intermediate court and she was a middle-of-the-road jurist, this promotion made her a top candidate for the Supreme Court after Ronald Reagan pledged to appoint the first woman to the bench during his 1980 campaign. Sure enough, in 1981, Reagan did elevate O'Connor to the Supreme Court. Her confirmation hearings suggested she was a centrist conservative. Her installation at the court established her as a rock star. And as you know, like I said, still unusual, right? Usually now when we're considering a Supreme Court justice, the impeccable credentials are federal court credentials. This one has been on, sometimes they serve on a trial court at the district court level, sometimes not, but they've been on the appellate courts. This one's been on this circuit or that circuit for 10 years, 15 years. This is somebody who came with no federal courtroom, maybe she practiced in a federal courtroom, but no judicial experience and on the federal bench, all state, and the usual, like I said, the usual picking grounds these days is the federal circuit courts. So anyway, O'Connor began her service as the kind of conservative Reagan had expected, with some exceptions. An early opinion, for instance, vehemently reaffirmed the Constitution's bar on gender discrimination in language that suggested a keen awareness of ongoing sexism in America. At the same time, she indicated an early willingness to re-examine and perhaps overturn Roe v. Wade. And she cast the decisive vote in a notorious decision that upheld, quote-unquote, sodomy bans. Her views on states' rights, capital punishment, campaign finance laws, and other hot-button issues also adhered to the usual right-wing viewpoint. Yet, by the late 1980s, O'Connor had begun to break away from the conservative flank of the court, in part because the hardline, pugnacious style of Antonin Scalia, appointed in 1986, alienated, there's only a couple of syllables in that, alienated and repelled her, especially when he insulted her in private memos and printed opinions. That's probably not going to win you any converts. In the 1990s, O'Connor drifted even further away from Scalia and his allies, often to their vocal disapproval and contempt. That's what did it in the first place. Eventually becoming the court's swing vote, securing for herself the role for a time as the most powerful jurist in America. O'Connor authored or joined a series of opinions that preserved the separation of church and state, safeguarded Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches, and enforced due process guarantees for criminal defendants. Most notably, O'Connor helped craft the court's famed compromise in Planned Parenthood v. Casey, the 1992 case that at first seemed destined to overrule Roe v. Wade. O'Connor used Casey to establish the undue burden test, which gave states the leeway to restrict abortion without allowing them to ban it outright. The Republican Party viewed Casey as the ultimate betrayal and recommitted itself to overturning the constitutional right to abortion, a crusade that would pay off 30 years later after President Donald Trump moved the court even further to the right with 3 appointments. By the 2000s, O'Connor had grown into a truly independent jurist, with one glaring, tragic exception that would fatally undermine her impact on the law. After the contested 2000 election, she voted with her fellow conservatives to halt the Florida recount and award the election to George W. Bush. Ironically, in the years after Bush v. Gore, O'Connor pushed the court in an increasingly liberal direction. She wrote the landmark opinion approving affirmative action in higher education. She co-authored the opinion upholding the McCain-Feingold campaign finance law and shifted her position on LGBTQ equality, voting to strike down anti-gay sodomy bans while affirming equal protection rights for same-sex couples. Critics often derided O'Connor for what seemed to be a small-bore, mincing, and case-by-case approach to constitutional doctrine. She didn't much care, because what O'Connor managed to reflect over her quarter-century on the court was a keen eye for what the moderate center of the country believed. Perhaps because she was the last sitting justice who had ever run for elected office, O'Connor cared what the public wanted and hated, and she almost unfailingly represented that view in her decisions. In 2005, O'Connor chose to step down so she could care for her husband, who had Alzheimer's disease. She did so at the peak of her power and influence, in part because the Chief Justice, William Rehnquist, insisted that she retire so that he could stay on the court another year. He died shortly thereafter. Her premature retirement allowed Bush, the president she installed in 2000, to replace her with Samuel Alito, a substitution that registered as a rebuke to everything O'Connor stood for. As a lower court judge, Alito had insisted that Pennsylvania's law requiring women to notify their spouses before terminating a pregnancy complied with the Constitution. It was this provision that O'Connor struck down in Casey, explaining that it would render women vulnerable to physical and psychological abuse at the hands of their husbands. Well, apparently the microphone's going to fight me on the mute button there, but okay. Alito finally overturned Casey along with Roe in the 2022 Dobbs decision and cast key votes overruling other landmark decisions by O'Connor. After Justices Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett joined the court, no aspect of O'Connor's jurisprudence was safe. In decision after decision, the court has pared back or overruled her opinions on affirmative action, campaign finance reform, separation of church and state, and other topics where she deviated from the conservative orthodoxy. O'Connor famously had a cushion in her chambers that featured the saying, "Maybe in error, but never in doubt." As the first woman to sit on the high court after nearly 200 years of male domination, she was forced to project certainty, even as she suffered the indignity of being called a token and a campaign promise. She navigated that by being an extraordinary first, and her jurisprudence reflected a lifelong solicitude for the outsiders and underrepresented, because she knew what it was like to be invisible. O'Connor often said that a wise old man and a wise old woman would come to the same result. She loathed the idea that her gender shaped her jurisprudence, but she was a wise old woman even when she was very young, in no small part because she understood that she didn't know everything, had to pretend that she did, and yet was eternally open to learning and adapting and changing her mind. The court would be far better off today if her successors exercised even a fraction of the modesty, restraint, and capacity for course correction that defined her service to the country. And one might even surmise that the reason for lifetime appointments to the federal bench is to make room for exactly that. That's at least one theory. However, so on the other hand, there were also some other views, let's say, of how O'Connor ought to be remembered. I don't have time to read Jameson Foser's version of that, but I do want to see if I can't find quickly for you the thing I saw over the weekend, which was, and I think I retweeted it at some point, except it wasn't a tweet, etc. But somebody reading from an excerpt of an older campaign book, and I think, unfortunately, it was a Jeffrey Toobin book, if I recall correctly, but some interesting passages about O'Connor having been at a party during the controversy arising after the 2000 election that became Bush v. Gore, and that while I guess the first round of litigation from the campaign was reaching the Supreme Court level, she was overheard at the party commenting on what she believed were illegal campaign activities by the Gore campaign, and expressing this astonishment. And have you heard all of the terrible illegal things that the Gore campaign was doing in order to win? Why, they were going into nursing homes and registering people to vote who they shouldn't have been registering and trying to force them, filling out their ballot. She had all kinds of what essentially proved to be conspiracy theories, unfounded conspiracy theories about how Gore and the campaign were cheating in some way. And then she went into the hearing and said, oh yeah, sure, I'll hear this case, and I'll come up with this weird ruling that is without basis in any precedent whatsoever, and we're going to try to convince people that this case, the outcome of this case, is a one-off, and you can't even use this for precedent because we're embarrassed at how we came to this conclusion. But just another weird example of what I guess then became a weird trend among conservative Republican appointees to the courts in years to come, of heading into deliberations with bizarro conspiracy theories in their head that they could only have absorbed from weirdo, wingnut right-wing media. And just, I guess, the predecessor to the charges about broccoli mandates and Cornhusker kickbacks and whatnot. Just a real downer.
Radio.com.
To realize that this was happening, to say the least.
To Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
All right, well, I can tell you now it's going to be a full week because there's so much that I wanted to get to today and we can only get to in the days to come. But don't despair. Why would you? When Justice Putnam is coming up next with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, not only picking up the slack on all those things we dropped, bringing you things we never even dreamed of bringing you. Coloring our week. Stay tuned.